According to the 2023 AFL statistics, which AFL clubs should be going for the flag in 2024? Now, there are a range of different important statistics which are more important than others for a team winning a flag. And in this video, I'm going to be running through which of the teams in 2023 were rather impressive statistically, and subsequently, you should be looking out for those teams in 2024. Also, just to quickly say, my glasses are broken, so a little bit of DIY. The first stat we have here is the general rating. The rating is effectively what the AFL and the statistics of the AFL, what they rate your team performance-wise. It says here it's the official AFL player ratings. Not that important, but I guess it is important to note that you can see the teams on the left here. Basically, most of the good teams are above AFL average. GWS prelim, Melbourne should have made grand final, Adelaide should have made top 8, Sydney top 8, Collingwood premiers, Brisbane, the Dogs, Carlton, etc, etc. And also very important to note that if you're an Essendon fan, you're a little bit worried about the fact you are below AFL average. But initially we can see GWS, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Sydney are quite far ahead. Especially GWS, they are very much ahead of the competition average. Moving on, we have got inside 50s. Inside 50s is another interesting one. It's effectively how much territory do you have? Is your territory mainly in the forward 50? We can see here the inside 50s are dominated once again by good teams. Melbourne, Port Adelaide, Brisbane, GWS, Adelaide, Carlton, Sydney, those sorts of teams. Interestingly, Collingwood are below AFL average for inside 50s, which, I've done a video, check it out on my YouTube channel. It might have been released, might not have been, but I've already recorded and edited a video about why Collingwood was statistically the best team in 2023. And in that video, I sort of went and highlighted why Collingwood did struggle in certain things, and this is one of those, but Collingwood are a super efficient team. Anyway, enough about Collingwood. Let's talk about the good teams. Melbourne, Port Adelaide, Brisbane, GWS, Adelaide once again. The Dogs seem to be up there. Sydney. So, these teams, it's quite impressive that they're up there. Next up, one of the most important stats, and it's commonly known to be the most important stat, arguably, contested possessions. Contested possessions is everything. If you're doing well in the contested possessions department, generally you're a successful team. Despite the fact that Collingwood are all the way down here, quite a bit below AFL average. But if you're a supporter of Melbourne, who are quite far ahead of the competition, you'll be liking the statistic there. Once again, Adelaide and GWS are towards the top. Very important statistically, and that is something to keep note of. Sydney as well are quite high up, and you see obviously Carlton do well too. Next up is ground ball gets. Ground ball gets, it's important, right? We can see here, look, ground ball gets is, I guess, more so pointing towards your AFL team's game style in the forward line. So you can see Collingwood, they, don't focus on ground ball gets because they are so efficient at kicking goals, expected scores per shot. They don't get that opportunity to get ground ball gets. And then teams with those bigger forwards generally have those ground ball gets up towards the high point of the competition. Sydney, Melbourne, GWS, Adelaide. Once again, better teams statistically so far seem to be those four. Carlton always doing relatively well, and you could argue the Dogs and Port Adelaide are quite high up too. Not the most important stat ground ball gets, but alas, we move. And we move to intercept possessions. Intercept possessions are also important to a team's game style. Once again, it's not so much an important stat for who wins the flag, but we can see that Melbourne, GWS, once again are right at the top of this. In fact, they are quite head and shoulders above the rest of the competition and far above the 69.1 AFL average. Clearly a strength of their game, and we see Sydney, Carlton, and Adelaide, and Port Adelaide for that fact, in the top half of this stat as well. Keep moving on. Shots. Shots is a very important indicator. Basically, the more shots you have, generally, the more likely you'll win. It depends where the shots come from. Are they close to goal, far out from goal? Are they on a huge angle, slight angle, no angle? What type of shots are they? Set shots or, really rush shots? How accurate you are and how consistent you are at making shots to goals. But alas, you want to be high in the shots. The more shots, the better. And you can even see that with North Melbourne, West Coast, Hawthorn, Fremantle, St Kilda, Essendon, Gold Coast. All the bad teams at the bottom. Quite interestingly, Carlton are right down below AFL average for shots. But it's the Adelaide teams, Port Adelaide and Adelaide, that dominate the shots. They are quite head and shoulders above the rest of the competition. And you can see shots are important. Brisbane, Melbourne, Geelong, Sydney, GWS, Richmond. Apart from Richmond, you know, the rest of the teams I would say are pretty impressive. Brisbane, Melbourne at the top, but the Adelaide teams, once again, and the two Sydney teams are doing very well statistically. Moving on to goals per inside 50. This is more about how consistent you are at converting. Quite simply, you know, are you good at converting your inside 50s into goals? And Adelaide are the best. They are the best. They get the most shots and the most goals per inside 50. Very impressive statistic. Awfully impressive. You can see Collingwood at the top there. Brisbane are 4th. So it's an important stat. Concerning for Carlton and Melbourne all the way down here, whose goals per inside 50 are not good. We all know that Melbourne struggle with that inside 50, but I'm surprised that Carlton are not very efficient. Moving forward, scoring shots per inside 50, relatively the same as goals, but scoring shots in general. Adelaide, Brisbane at the top. So Brisbane are starting to have some good statistics to the name. Once again, though, Melbourne's struggling. Carlton are doing a lot better this time. GWS below AFL average, but Sydney, Collingwood, Port Adelaide, and Brisbane, Adelaide, and Geelong, who are, you know, a little sneaky one, as well as Richmond and the Western Bulldogs, seem to be in the top of most of these stats we've talked about so far. And then scores per inside 50, awfully similar. You can see Adelaide, Port Adelaide at the top. The same clubs are effectively there, except Carlton are quite below average. Launch. What does launch mean? Launch means score launches. Effectively, how can you produce a big thrust of attacking threat, and subsequently it's called a scoring launch. You can see, once again, the better teams are all towards the top. Adelaide, Brisbane, Port Adelaide, Sydney, Geelong, Melbourne, Collingwood, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, Richmond somehow sneak into the top half. Again, a little bit of a weird one. Richmond are doing awfully well. But Adelaide, again, alongside Brisbane, Adelaide and Brisbane for the last sort of 3-4 stats have been towards the top. And Port Adelaide have also been towards the top. So these three teams are ones you want to look out for. They're great at converting, and clearly the score launches are their threat as well. Expected scores. Arguably my favorite stat to work with. Expected scores per shot, expected this, expected that. I love expecting. I don't really know what that means. Anyway, expected scores is an awfully important stat. XG, expected goals in soccer, is an awfully important stat, and expected scores in the AFL is an awfully important stat. Generally speaking, the teams towards the top should be scoring those points. You know, with all these stats and everything that's been observed and evaluated and analyzed in the AFL, you know, a shit ton has gone into creating the expected scores, and it's a really good way of giving a really good indicator of how your team's doing in the attacking sense, not in the defensive sense. So, you know, Port Adelaide could be at the top of expected scores, like they are, but they could be at the bottom of expected scores conceded. But this is the attacking threat. We see Collingwood as an attacking threat aren't the greatest, just above AFL average. But once again, Port Adelaide, Brisbane, and Adelaide all towards the top. The Sydney teams are sort of coming back in the stats, and Geelong are in this, you know, upper echelon as well. Carlton struggling still. Rating. What does rating mean? We can see here rating is the average score above or below expected score per shot at goal. Effectively, you want to be high in these ratings. This is where Collingwood excel. These expected scores are where Collingwood generally do pretty good at, despite the expected scores for not being right. Anyway, these XSs. And the ratings are quite interesting. You know, we see North Melbourne are great in this rating, but generally, apart from North, the rest of the teams are good. Adelaide again, towards the top. Geelong doing well. Brisbane holding their own. Very interesting. Tackles! Every team needs to tackle. Tackling is really good. I mean, it's important. Apart from Brisbane. Brisbane are so bad at tackling. They're at the bottom of the competition, well below AFL average. But tackles is a good indicator of the defensive capabilities of your team, their hunger, and more to the point, the game style that the team adopts. You know, we see that Brisbane are a hungry, great team. They just don't really value tackling that much. They're a much slower team. And then you got the frantic teams up the top here. Adelaide, Sydney at the top, the Dogs do well, Collingwood are obviously there, and GWS and Carlton find themselves above AFL average. Tackles per inside 50, tackles inside 50, very important if your game style revolves around that. We've seen Collingwood, they don't get those sort of ground ball gets, and they also don't get the tackles inside 50, because generally their game style isn't bombing it long, get the ball to the ground, and the smalls do the work. And to be honest, by the time that Collingwood go inside 50, they've already kicked a goal because of how good at converting they are. They don't have that opportunity to get their tackles inside 50. So in that respect, it's not overly important, but it is a good indicator with how your team bases or how they attack. And we see GWS, Melbourne, Port Adelaide, and Sydney and Brisbane, all very good teams, really love a tackle inside 50. Generally a really good indicator with the pressure forwards how good they are. Plus minus, what does that mean? Well, plus minus effectively means the average score above or below the expected per game, excluding rush behinds. So what score you're predicted to get based off expected scores and everything. Are you above or below that? If you're above that, you do a lot better. If you're well below that, you're not great. So being above, once again, being at the top of this, you want to be at. Collingwood at the top. Adelaide again. Geelong again. Melbourne not really there all too much. Brisbane are doing well statistically again, and Sydney are there as well. That is just a couple of statistics that I've gone through. A couple of stats to highlight if your team will probably do well in 2024. We've seen through all those stats I've gone through, Adelaide are the team that generally head on top. They're consistently good at every stat. They were never bottom 5. In fact, they were rarely below the AFL average, which means they're a consistent team. They can do a lot of good things, and Adelaide could be set to explode in 2024. The team I was most disappointed by was Carlton. Carlton really struggled with important stats, and you couldn't really tell what their game style was based off those stats. What I mean by that is with Brisbane and Collingwood, they were dead last or bottom 3 for quite a few of those stats, but there were stats they were top of which indicated what their game style was like, where Carlton typically were average or below average. GWS were really good. Sydney and Geelong, two teams that are, weren't the best in 2023, were very impressive statistically. Richmond and the Dogs more or less did alright. Port Adelaide were really good statistically. Melbourne probably not the greatest. Essendon really poor, Gold Coast really poor, and West Coast abhorrently poor. What does that mean? Who knows? But it's a different type of video where I wanted to go and have a little sit down and talk about what stats are important and what teams are good at them. And if you're one of the teams I've mentioned that are really good, get excited for 2024. Who do you think is going to win the flag? Let me know in the comments. Make sure you like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Follow the TikTok FTFooty. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to be seeing you in another video.